So UAW President Shawn Fain just expanded the auto workers strike affecting 38 locations across 20 states. And I posted this in the community tab a couple of days ago. And let me ask you all a very, very simple question. If you were a boss running a company, multi-billion-dollar company, and your workers all came to you and said, hey, we want to make more money and work less hours, on top of retirement and pension plan benefits being reinstated, what would be your honest response? Seriously. See, I asked this question in the last video, right? And everybody in the comments skipped to my loo right over it. They just skipped right over it. So now let me ask you a follow-up question. If your workers came to you and said they want to make more money, work less hours, and then all of a sudden there's an influx of available workers who will work for half of what you're paying your current working staff, and they don't care anything about a union or having one, and working 40 hours is nothing to them. Hell, a lot of them would be excited to work 50 to 60 plus hours to be able to provide for their families. If that option became available, what would you do as an owner? What would you do as president? What would you do as CEO? I urge you to not be disingenuous with your answer. Please, do not be disingenuous with your answer to that question. If you were the owner, CEO, president, what would be the move to make? What would help your bottom line? What would be best for business? There's a belief that unions are great for big companies, and for good reason. A lot of you want unions because, hey, let's face it, a lot of you want somebody to advocate for you to keep your job when a lot of you have poor work habits. You have poor work ethic. You're late to work all the fucking time. You just have an overall disposition about the workplace. And after all, unions are supposed to be the line drawn in the sand where employers have to toe the line to some degree anyway and advocate for you even when you're in the wrong as an employee, right? But history does support the institution of unions as it relates to closing the wage gap between the wealthy and the middle class. Unionized workers have historically seen at the very least a 10 to 15% wage increase. They've seen better benefits and positive outcomes from employee grievances with the company, meaning they're responsible for instituting a more formal and fair process when it comes to reprimanding and disciplining their workers. The union is responsible for all of that, right? History shows that the largest shrinkage and the income gap happened somewhere between the 1930s and 1970s until they fell out of favor thanks to business culture, which caused companies to refocus their goals on maximizing shareholder value and minimizing worker benefits. Maximizing shareholder value and minimizing worker benefits. This idea was also backed by the court system, right? As they placed an emphasis on the value of private property and private profit. Or in other words, they drew the line in the sand on the benefits of a company going private versus a company that is public. Operate totally different, right? Responsibility to the workers is totally different, right? Now, why am I mentioning all this? Well, since that time, unions have become looked at with disdain by bigger companies because they understand what that means to their bottom line. Since that time, it's been reported that trillions of dollars have migrated into the hands of the top 1% of earners in the U.S. That is an upwards redistribution of wealth that has basically killed and choked out the middle class. And that is what is continuing to happen today. These companies are showing you where their loyalties lie. They've always shown you. It's always been about corporate greed. It's always been about preserving the riches and standing of the wealthy. Capitalism at its finest. That's what this is. And it's what this country was built on. Now, those are the pros to having a union, but what are the cons to having a union, right? Well, let's start with a simple question. If everything was perfect within the inner workings of a company and the employees, the management, the CEOs and staff were all happy and content with their jobs, they were content with their wages and they're content with their benefits, then, well, what use would there be for a middleman? What use would there be for the union? None, right? So doesn't that fact lend credence to the idea that it's the job of the union and the union reps to cause a healthy amount of tension and displeasure in the work environment for their own job security? After all, unions are paid for and funded by you. It's funded by you all. You all pay their salaries directly out of your checks. Unions also means that companies might be forced to keep around bad employees for an extended period of time, which effectively slows progression of the business and negatively impacts and affects the culture of the work environment, right? Another thing that unions are likely to do is drive up the cost of the business. Who do you all think the increased wages and costs that these companies have to pay will affect the most? Spoiler alert, it's you. It's you. It's us. It's the working class. Why? Because that means that now the business is saying, hey, we got to increase the cost of goods. Now we got to go and mark up the product some more to make sure that we make up for the expenditures to our payroll and bottom line. The business is not going to eat that. You all are. We are. It's how businesses have operated for decades. This is not a secret. And the response from the companies is, look, the companies are saying, we want to play ball. We want to play ball, but we want to do it in good faith. And that means coming to a reasonable conclusion that makes sense in the competitive market, because Tesla don't have these problems. And these three companies are already at the highest expense in terms of production versus labor versus cost of doing business, right? So they're saying at the end of the day, we got to make sure this makes sense to our bottom line. We have to negotiate in good faith. This is the largest auto worker strike in history that has impacted all three major automakers. That being Stellantis, aka Chrysler, GM, and Ford. And President Biden just walked the picket line in support of the UAW, came out there and said, oh, you guys got to keep up the good fight. In other words, right? So many words. That's what he said. But let me tell you what else President Joe Biden just did. A couple days ago, his administration just announced a policy to allow nearly 500,000 migrants into the U.S. And not only did he allow them, he granted them asylum and legal status, which means what? Which means that they can now work the same jobs that you all work. So all of a sudden, you have an influx of migrants into the country. And if you're the CEO or president of a billion-dollar corporation, or more specifically, the auto worker plants, GM, Ford, Chrysler, and you're dealing with the union and what you deem as difficult employees and staff in a difficult situation, in a difficult negotiation, well, now the potential answer to all your troubles just walked through the door. I know you all think that your jobs are protected because you're a part of the union. I know you all think that you got these companies by the throat because they're having to shut down facilities and EV plants across the country. But I would caution you to pay very, very close attention to what's happening right now around you. This country is all about keeping the rich wealthy and keeping you all beneath them. And they'll do anything to keep it that way. I hope you all win. I do. I really do. Wholeheartedly, because I think it's a positive effect on the working industry as a whole. But if I was working at one of these three companies, I promise you I'd be on high alert. Because even if and when a deal is struck between the UAW and the auto industry, change is coming.